advantage of the day. When you get an opportunity in this game, you make a play. The playmakers on three. 1, 2, 3.
Touchdown, Kansas City! The Chiefs are right in the thick of it, baby! And welcome once again to another edition of Defending the Kingdom. Mitch Holthus with you, voice of the Chiefs, along with senior team reporter Matt McMullen, a.k.a. Matt Stat, and the man we call the shop, the Spider-Man, the barber shop, the barber of Deville, Seville, or whatever.
That's a new one.
Sean Barber, the head of the ambassadors as well. So a lot on the resumes here of these two young men that join me here in Defending the Kingdom. And before we get into the importance of OTAs, CCC, what does all of that mean? Let's do a Defending the Kingdom tradition, and that is travel around the world.
So I picked 13 names and places, again, of course, in honor of 13 seconds. I kind of like this new tradition here. So we'll start all over the globe. We've got Carlos in the Dominican Republic listening to DTK. We have a listener in Manaus, Brazil, a listener in Israel, Jim in Fiji, Ben in Leer, Belgium, and then Mike declared Stockholm, Sweden as Chiefs Kingdom, Scandinavia. So love that. People listening all over the world. And, of course, lots of people all over the country as well. Tanner declared Council Bluffs, Iowa as Chiefs River City Kingdom. Tom is listening out in Arizona. He goes to a dedicated Chiefs bar in Scottsdale and watches the Chiefs every single Sunday. We've got Mark from North Montana. Jose declared Inglewood, California as Chiefs Kingdom Battleground. And, of course, we got two other teams out there, including the Chargers. So I love that, having Chiefs Kingdom declared out there in Inglewood. We've got Chad in Sarasota, Florida. Henry in Mission, Kansas, which is a great example of if you live in Kansas City, let us know. We're still going to let everyone else know that you're listening here in the KC Metro. And lastly, Don in Los Angeles. He listens while driving his semi-truck.
We've had a lot of northern Montana, haven't we? There's been a lot of Montana that have
we're expanding.
Pop in to Defending the Kingdom. I got one to add. This one is, we have such great female fans in the Chiefs Kingdom. The NFL has a metric they call WALL, which is watch, attend, and listen. And they break it down demographically. And obviously one of the demographics is how fired up are your female fans. And the Chiefs have one of the most engaged female groups fans in the entire National Football League. This is Sarah Block from Tecumseh, Michigan. Not Tecumseh, Nebraska, or Tecumseh, Kansas, or a lot of Tecumseh, but it's Tecumseh, Michigan. And get this combination. Sarah Block is a Phillies baseball fan and an ardent Chiefs football fan.
Gotcha. Loves red. Different shades of red.
That's it. I've never heard of a Phillies-Chiefs combo, but hey. All right, this episode of Defending the Kingdom coincides with Phase 3 of OTAs. Gotcha. And let's get into first what are OTAs, and then we're breaking it down to CCC. Why are OTAs important? Why have they been important to the success of the Kansas City Chiefs? And we'll dive right in, and I'll tell you where the CCC comes into play. But first, let's just quickly go the definition of organized team activities. There's the acronym. There's 3 different phases. The first phase is basically meetings, strength and conditioning, rehab for injured guys. Phase 2, now you can get into individual work. You cannot go defense on offense. Okay. You got to stay kind of defense, but you can get group work and individual work. And then now we are in Phase 3, which starts to look a little more like training camp, although no pads, no hitting, but you can do 7-on-7 offense versus defense, 9-on-7, 11-on-11 drills. Okay. Organized team activities. You get asked every day, Matt, what are OTAs?
What are OTAs? OTAs are important for a lot of different reasons, and we'll hear from Sean on this because Sean actually participated in OTAs. But it's really basically the closest to real football we've been since the AFC title game, right? And like you said, no pads, no live contact. Like they're running around in shorts out there, but it's 11 offensive players going against 11 defensive players. And with all these new players that we have, they're doing it for the first time here at the team facility. And it's exciting because right now what these guys are doing is they're preparing for training camp, essentially, both mentally and physically. You're getting ready for a grueling training camp. And in a lot of ways, this is like the cheat sheet for the test if training camp is the test. This is your opportunity to come in here in May, and this stuff is voluntary. You don't have to be here, but the Chiefs, of course, always have a great turnout because they realize how important this is. You have an opportunity to do the installs, figure out what the playbook looks like, and most importantly, figure out what the culture is like here. How do you practice? How do you go about a day being a Chief so that when you get to training camp and you get to the season, you're going 100 miles per hour already? And a lot of teams, a lot of coaches don't really value this time, but Coach Reed certainly does.
You've participated in these as a player. You see it from a player's perspective. The Players Association in the collective bargaining agreement basically laid out the rules we just talked about.
Yeah.
But your thoughts on OTAs?
Man, I guess you got to look at it from the point of a veteran versus the point of a young rookie or a guy who's trying to become a starter. There's two different viewpoints of it. When you're a veteran and you already know the landscape, you already know how to play the game and how to condition yourself to make it throughout the entire season. You look at OTA as just something to keep your off season from getting off the rails, from getting too far away from football. The team is dragging you back into the city to go over some football stuff. You just want to be away from football for a few months. So most veterans see it as being almost a nuisance, whereas the young guys, the rookies, first, second, third-year players that are trying to still earn a starting position, see it as an opportunity, like a proving ground. How can I prove that I deserve to be number one and number two deep? How can I prove I deserve a starting role in the special teams? And where is everybody else kind of positioning themselves? Who am I going to target as far as whose position I'm trying to take or go after? And so there's two different kind of value systems, I think, when it comes to these OTAs, plus the strength training and the conditioning and the things you're being able to do off the field. But just when it comes to straight football, as far as the depth chart, I think it's two different kind of modes you are, depending if you're a seasoned veteran and then opposed to being a rookie or a young player.
Yeah, and your thoughts interesting about how teams approach it, because Andy Reid approaches these like they are extremely important. We've talked about how fast Andy Reid has been in the last 6 years and starts 16-3 in September. A big part of that is great camps, but great camps are set up by great mini camps that are mandatory, but that's set up by these OTAs. Okay. Now, on Defending the Kingdom, those of you who watch and listen to us religiously know that we'll try to tie in, mathematics, the base 10, right? Or we'll tie in literature, or we'll tie in maybe science. This time we're going to tie in history, because we're going to go CCC, and I'm going to relate it to the Civilian Conservation Corps that was put in place from 1933 to 1942 by FDR during the Depression. It was to put young males to work, basically, and it was to be in conservation projects. They planted in that 9-year period, had to end because of World War II, 3.5 billion trees, and many of the state parks that you enjoy around in the States anyway, for those of you who live in the United States, were put in place by the CCC back in the 1930s. All right, that's our history lesson. Now we go to the OTA CCC, and let's start with our first C of the CCCs, and that is conditioning. And I think there's two definitions here. One, you talked about conditioning, and that is to get physically ready to go. Two, to me, is the conditioning of your culture. Of the 90 guys on the roster right now, 42 are new to the Chiefs' kingdom. Yes. Matt, you and I have seen this, and Shop knows this, that it's not just getting in shape. It is how you practice, why you practice, what you do, and how you do it to get you ready to get into this culture of winning that the Chiefs have.
Well, first of all, we always learn new things like live on air from Mitch when we're doing this, don't we? I remember Russian history last year and like Rasputin. Yeah, and we somehow get back to the Chiefs. But you're absolutely right. And the thing with the Chiefs is they've had so much success over the last several years. And, yeah, it's because they have great players and great coaches, but the culture is at the core of all of it. And you don't just show up in training camp or for the season and have culture. Like, that starts on days in the middle of May when you go out there and you see the veteran players that are there. They're attacking the day with excitement to get better. And younger players see that and they emulate it. We talked earlier watching practice about Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is 32 years old. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. You can make the argument right now that he's the greatest tight end of all time. He's definitely in the top 5 of all time. And he's going out there in May in OTAs and has the energy of a 23-year-old 7th-round pick trying to make the team. And that kind of culture is infectious. And I think when you're a younger player and you see that, and there's so many young players right now on the Chiefs trying to earn their stripes, you realize that's how we do things here. And when you have all these different players embracing that mentality, no matter the success that they have, it just breeds competition and it breeds victories and AFC Championship game berths and Super Bowl titles. So it's a beautiful thing seeing that here in OTAs, and that's a huge part of why the Chiefs have been so successful, is guys like Travis Kelce embracing days like in the middle of May.
I love that you brought him up. And we saw him today score a couple touchdowns, and he does the double flex. It was like he was 10 years old. He was having an awesome time, but it has to permeate through the rest of not only his tight end room, where there's new guys like Jordan Franks or young players trying to get it figured out like a Noah Gray, or throughout the entire team. Now, Shop, let's talk about conditioning here. Yeah. One, physical conditioning, and then two, and you played for Coach Reed, getting yourself mentally and emotionally prepared to be a part of winning here.
Man, mindset is a big part of this, and you talk about having the right mindset to overcome obstacles as far as mental, physical, all the different constraints and obstacles they put in front of you, all the different pitfalls. Some of them are man-created on purpose, just to see how do you handle adverse situations as an athlete. But most of them are just the normal day-to-day that goes by. And you talked about Travis Kelce, man. It's amazing to see a guy at his point of his career with as much success he's had still come out during a voluntary practice and still show that type of excitement. Because the adverse side of that, or the opposite part of the spectrum, is also a great tight end, Tony Gonzalez. Well, Tony Gonzalez is a guy who would go through his plays on the sideline during this kind of period, but let a young guy go and get the live reps because he's been there, done that. I don't need that rep. I don't want to even worry about getting injured or pulling a hamstring or kind of a soft injury type thing. Mentally, I'm already understanding what we're supposed to do at this phase, so I'm going to let the young guy go get some reps. And then also like a Willie Roaf, right? He'll come out there with his flip-flops and athletic tape over the flip-flops and talk about, hey, coach, like I ain't going today. Like, so let the young guy go in there. But then that shows the two opposite sides of that spectrum. You have some all-American top 100 NFL players that's ever played the game that almost refuse to go out there because they've already been there, done that. They know the offense inside and out. But then you got guys that are just as talented saying, I don't want to miss one opportunity to be great. And that's when, as a coach, you walk around the locker room, you walk around the practice field, and you ask the same question. Who loves football? Do you love football? Do you really love football? Well, you don't have to ask the question to Kelce because he shows it to you each and every day. Every moment he has the opportunity to, he shows you that he loves football. But a guy like Gonzalez or a guy like Willie Roaf, even though they're great football players, sometimes you have to question, do they really love football or do they just love game day? Because there's a difference between those two mindsets. And so when you talk about mindset, what you want to build is a guy who has that Mamba mentality. We talk about Michael Jordan. Practices so hard with so much enthusiasm that the game day becomes easy. The practice is what you really push yourself to dedicate yourself to becoming obsessed with the finer details of your alignment, your assignment, how to execute your position. Because if you do that every day in practice and you build and build and build, then the game becomes so easy. And I think that's the kind of almost that Pavlov's effect you want to create with the culture of this atmosphere. When we hit that white line, practice field, game day, it doesn't matter what part of the season or off season, when you step on that field, that white line, nobody walks. You run from drill to drill. You stay eyes on the coach. You're always in a learning mode. No coach should look for you to have to tell you to go in. You should be having eyes on the coach, waiting for him just to give you eye contact so that you can go get that next rep. Because everybody should be hungry to be able to get on the field, get some film, and show that you can add to the team. No helmets are ever on the ground. Never. You never put your helmet on the ground. If you take it off your head, you hold on to it until you put it back on. But you always are buckled up, ready to jump in and add. And that's the culture. That's the atmosphere. I remember, things were going 100 miles an hour. And anytime Coach Spags asked me to jump into the field, he didn't have to wait for me to put my gloves on and get retaped. And, I was always, throughout the entire practice, ready to go, get that next snap, get that next rep, get that next rep, and be able to, make a play. Playmakers want to make plays, and it doesn't matter what the scenario. It doesn't matter if it's mandatory, voluntary. I just want an opportunity to go and show my skills and my abilities.
Yeah, you want to know why organized team activities are important to the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid. The first area is conditioning, and not just physical conditioning. It is the mental and emotional conditioning. Shop, you just said it so very well. The way you enter the building, the way you handle meetings, the way you are on time for meetings. It just puts you into a tempo and a rhythm that is all throughout this building that gets you ready for St. Joe. You don't have to learn it in St. Joe or learn it during mandatory minicamp. You already know it, and it's part of your also muscle memory almost. All right, the second C of our CCC, why OTAs are important to the Kansas City Chiefs and why they help the Chiefs win and why the Chiefs get off to usually an awesome start in a season, and that is consumption. So the second C is consumption. Let's be honest here. The Kansas City Chiefs, offense and defense, complicated.
Yeah.
Coach Reed will tell you, going to St. Joe, they want to have most of the offense installed. They have something north of 700 plays on offense, and that includes a variety of different formations. Defensively, and I'm going to get to you in a second, Shop, on the complexity of Spags' defense, because it is complex. But, Matt, to understand and to get the volume of this offense as much as you can so that you hit the mandatory camp on the run, hit St. Joe on the run, you hit the preseason games on the run, and when the season starts, you're at a full sprint.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of teams in the NFL, they don't look at it that way. Training camp begins with you installing the playbook and you learning these things, and it's a slow ramp up. And for some teams that works, but for a team like the Chiefs that's consistently proven they're a championship caliber team, the roots of that culture that we keep talking about is in May and OTAs when you're doing all this work now. So then the guys can go home after mandatory minicamp is over in 3 weeks. They can still be thinking about this a little bit, take some time off, but still be thinking about it. You've done it already, albeit in shorts, but you've still done it. So when you get to training camp and the pads come on, you've done this before. You know what you're doing. You're not learning new information at training camp. This is all stuff that you did weeks ago. And that's the beauty of how Coach Reed organizes this stuff. One of the things that many people might not know is that Coach Reed, yes, he's a great coach, but he is a tremendous organizer, amazing at it. And if you just watch a training camp practice, if you came from a different country that you'd never watched football before, and you watched training camp practice, you'd be wondering how this organized chaos is taking place. And OTAs is the same way. I mean, a horn's going off, but everyone knows where to go at all times. And they're digesting all of this stuff and learning it so that when they get to training camp, they can hit the ground running and attack every single day of camp and then hit the season running. And that's why you said, I mean, they've been so good to start the season over the last several years. It's interesting, too, because, yeah, there's kind of like the idea of a depth chart in OTAs, like you might see on Twitter, certain people saying this guy's with the starting unit, this guy's with the second unit. There's not really a depth chart. Like, I wouldn't read too much into that. Like, that's the earliest iterations of the first, second, third, and fourth teams. But what you can see in this time is certain guys rise to the occasion. And we've seen that over the years. We saw Trey Smith last year. He's my favorite example from last year. So I take notes every single day of OTAs. And Trey Smith was with the third team offensive line on day one. He was behind some guys. By day 3, he was on the second team. And then by day 9, he was the starting right guard, and he never relinquished that position. He didn't show up at training camp after being drafted with no work in between and just be given the starting right guard job. He earned it in OTAs after proving himself day after day, went into training camp, had that job already, and never relinquished it. So that happened in OTAs, not in training camp. Also, guys like Darius Fountain. He made this team out of camp last year, was a great story. He first was turning heads in OTAs. Jody Fortson is the same way. So when you're following great stories in training camp and you learn about a player for the first time, for many people, that's the first time they've heard of this guy's name, but it likely started in OTAs, and it's who can consume this stuff at the highest rate with the highest efficiency. This stuff starts in OTAs with who can really digest this stuff most effectively.
Outside observers talk about how effective the Chiefs are with shifts and motions to get you either, to trick your eyes if you're on defense. But we're also seeing where the Chiefs have got to get Marquez Valdez-Scantling up to speed as fast as possible. Juju Smith-Schuster, Ronald Jones Jr. We can go right down the list. It's just 42 new guys, but there are guys that they are counting on right away to be able to contribute. Whomever's at right tackle, could Kennard win that job? But they've got to be ready to go out of the gate.
Yep.
And so on offense, again, high volume. This is Calc 3, but right now, there's no wasted days. Every day is important, and to get this offense down so it becomes just rote learning, to have 700 plays learned going into St. Joe becomes paramount. Now, Shop, I want to ask you about the defensive side because you have experience with Spags. You have coached. You have been a volunteer coach at camp.
Yeah.
You've been in meetings. But let's back it up now to OTAs and the fact that so many young guys now are going to be expected to contribute for the Chiefs on defense. The OTAs and their importance were in the second C. Remember, the first one was conditioning, not just physical conditioning, but mental and emotional conditioning to the culture, to the consumption. With Spags' defense, how important are OTAs just to consume it because it's a complicated defense?
Anybody who says it's not confusing is lying. At the end of the day, there's it's spaghetti on the table. It's a bunch of noodles and meatballs and sauce everywhere, and you got to find a way to just develop little pockets in your brain to really put certain plays defensively, certain adjustments in certain areas. If you don't find a way to do that, it'll get to a point in the season where they're still growing, developing, putting in new wrinkles and new defenses, and you're still struggling with some of the day one stuff. So when we talk about consumption in this phase of off season, it's all the basics. It's all the things, the rules, the shifts in motions. How do we adjust? When do we lock? When do we bump as far as man-to-man coverage? When do we go from Rolex to Vegas, Vegas to Rolex? Some of those defensive terms they transcend overall all the defenses. And so when you have certain concepts that really have a priority and they go, no matter what we're in, no matter what package we're in, these concepts travel with all of our defensive fronts and personnels. Those are the things we go over in this phase of this, primary getting guys comfortable with is basically some of the bread and butter stuff about a defense. But you got to realize the things that are going to be put in, they can't wait for anybody. You got A through Z to put in. We got to put it all in a short time. And when you have questions, you got to get those things answered right now. Young guys, the one thing they struggle with getting on the field is not knowing when to adjust and not knowing who to pick up when it comes to the blitz pressure packages, and then not understanding how their drop zone coverage sometimes changes depending on offensive shifts and motions. Yeah. And if you don't know how all of that stuff just works together, then you're gonna find yourself kind of swamped. Maybe like you said, on that third string depth chart for a long time. Even though you might be one of the most talented guys in the room, your talent is not going to be able to showcase itself because you just don't know where to go. You don't know where you belong. And so this is the time for the guys you ain't got much else to do but football. Dive into that playbook. Learn your position. Learn the two positions next to you because that kind of helps you figure out where you belong. And through that whole process, like you said, consumption. Consume the playbook. Let that become your gospel. Let that lead you only like only the Bible can, right? It leads you through the faith in that playbook. That has to become your GPS. That's the way you got to lead yourself through life. And all the answers are in that playbook. But you got to know how to find it, how to apply it, how to use it to make sure that you align and you know your assignment. And then it's all about execution.
The defensive side of this discussion, to me, is fascinating because you have this blend. You've got George Karlaftis, you've got Trent McDuffie, you've got Brian Cook, you've got guys that were drafted, defenders, Leo Chanel, go down the line, Joshua Williams, don't leave anybody out, Jalen Watson, the draftees, and then you've got like a Nick Bolton or Willie Gay Jr., who you've thrust into different and more responsibility in those roles. And to me, we're taping this on May the 25th, and Matt, May the 25th, to me, for that group and consider those dynamics, is as important as it is on August the 25th.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because we talk a lot about the offense and the receivers all finding cohesion with Patrick Mahomes and how's the offense going to look this season. But the defense is kind of the same thing. It's exciting because we have a lot of really good young players in this defense that I think are really going to thrive here. But they are kind of figuring out their roles right now. Yeah. The Chiefs, in a lot of ways, have kind of moved on from a lot of defensive players that were here for a long time that really established themselves. And now it's guys like Justin Reed who are kind of running the show. Nick Bolton's going to be the Mike this year, be the green dot, be one of the leaders of this defense, and he's just a second-year player. It's exciting because he's ready for that opportunity. It's very clear. And watching this defense in practice, like they're flying around and making plays. There's a lot of length at the cornerback position I'm super excited about. I can't wait to see how when we do our 3 safety looks, how the three safeties kind of work together, because I think all those skill sets really are cohesive. It's going to be interesting, but this is the time where you figure out as a unit, how are we going to defend? And Justin Reed spoke with the media today kind of about that, and he said a few interesting things. He said that this is going to be the most fun defense he's ever played in, because Spags is going to use him in so many different versatile roles. But also, he is relishing the opportunity to face Patrick Mahomes and the first-team offense every single day. And remember, they couldn't do that in an official capacity until literally this week, because you couldn't have 11 on 11. But he was like, we're facing these guys every day, and iron sharpens iron. And you're facing Patrick Mahomes every single day. All of a sudden, when you're facing maybe a lesser quarterback in a game, it's just a half second slower. So that's the beautiful thing with that.
Some of the most fun I had in my career was facing Tony Gonzalez on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The opportunity to face somebody who you knew was headed for Canton, and you got to sharpen your tool belt on a guy like that, it made Sunday so easy. There's no tight end that can put a move on me greater than Tony tried to put on me during practice. So it made me so confident facing all these other opponents, all these other tight ends. Like, none of y'all are Tony, so if I can shut him down or even come close to shutting him down during the practice, then I know I'm gonna be lights out, shut down on game day.
New coaches get a chance to have an extra week in the phase one of OTAs. It has to happen really early, not now, early on. But it's almost like this defense feels like there's so much new to it and so much exciting new to it that it's almost like, gosh, I wish Spags had another week. But just know this. OTAs are really important to this defense, and you can get excited about it, but the second part is consumption. The third part in the third C, the first C, of course, conditioning, not just physical conditioning, but mental, emotional, learn the culture, learn how we win, how we practice. 2, consumption, the huge volume of being achieved. 3 is chemistry, and why chemistry and the development of it is huge for this team during OTAs. Yes, in late May, in June. In chemistry, we just heard, and we heard Patrick Mahomes during the first media session of OTAs talk about it so much. It was just all throughout his discussion and the questions asked to him, even to the point where he went out of his way to have his own training session on his own, real voluntary, in Texas. But Patrick talked about the importance of developing chemistry now.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I think we got some chemistry in. Just getting with those guys for almost a month and working out with them, throwing with them. We'd go to lunch, go to dinner, stuff like that. You kind of build that chemistry, and I think a big part of especially our offense is having that chemistry on the field, being able to know what the guy's doing without having to talk about it. And I think it's translated. I mean, so far in the practice that we had, we feel like we're on the same page and kind of having that chemistry, and we're going to keep building on that.
So pretty clear there how Patrick Mahomes, what he's learned about chemistry and developing it now during OTAs. Start with you, Shop.
Right.
In chemistry here on both sides of the ball and in special teams, because I don't want to leave them out. That goes back to the culture part, because you got to learn how to be on special teams complicated in Dave Tobe's system. Chemistry, how much you start developing that right now in OTAs.
Chemistry, the key to it is communication. It always begins and ends with communication. If you can be an effective communicator on the field, you have a position on that field. If you can't, no matter how much skill, no matter how much talent, all of those things fall at the wayside if you can't either accept communication or deliver it. And so from a safety standpoint, when you see the offensive set comes out and you got to communicate to the linebackers, let them know what coverage you want to be in, how you want them to see the offense, you got to be able to communicate it verbally or by hand signals. And then as linebackers, when you look at that defensive front, there's a certain way you want them to fit against the offense to protect against run gaps. You got to be able to tell them axe stunt or bash or crash stunts to take the A, B, and C gaps away so that you can feel free to flow fast and go make plays. If those things don't get communicated on the defensive side, you don't have a chance at stopping these high-powered offenses today. And then when you talk about even on the offense side of the ball, everybody is trying to see the defense through Pat Mahomes' eyes. If I'm a wide receiver, the only thing that matters to me is that I see the defense the same way that the quarterback sees it, because he's going to throw the ball to an area to take advantage of what they're doing defensively. And I want to make sure I'm at the right place at the right time and then make that great catch to be able to matriculate and move that ball down the field. And then on special teams, hey, man, you're the tip of the spear for a reason. You can make some of the biggest plays on special teams. The momentum change that happens on a special teams turnover or block punt, lack of communication leads to blocked punts and kicks more than anything. It's never a talent thing. It's the lack of communication. You got to be able to count 1, 2, 3, 4 one side, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got to know if you're doing a zone blocking scheme versus man. If those things aren't communicated the right way, everybody who's pressuring block kicks, block punts, they do stabs, they do twists, they do overload aside because they want to mess up your count. So you have to be so well at communication to make sure that you do one thing, right? That communication is the key to being able to compete on Sundays.
And with Dave Tobe, he's got so many countermeasures built into his special teams, whether it's a return or covering. It's a measure. It's what you think is not what's really going to happen.
Yes.
What you see is not going to happen because he's got a countermeasure ready to go, and you've got to be a player that can acclimate to that system. That's part of the chemistry. What I found fascinating in Patrick's comments, and I think as much of him getting the guys together, so to speak, in Texas prior to the start of this third phase of OTAs or phase 2 of OTAs was the off-the-field stuff. Now think about it just for the three of us. We've done things outside, off camera, outside of the building that to me is as important or valuable to us being able to connect as it is inside the building. For players, it's even more so. But I found it fascinating that Patrick Mahomes is emphasizing the off-field chemistry stuff almost as much as the on-field chemistry stuff.
I like that you mentioned our podcast as an example because I was thinking of the same thing. I mean, if we all came in here, we're hired the same day, and they're like, do a Chiefs podcast, we'd do our best, but, I mean, we wouldn't know each other. We wouldn't know how each other acts or what you think about or what you are interested in. You know, it would be hard. We don't do a ton of, like, preparation into the outline of the show. I mean, we just know each other, and we just talk about the Chiefs and football, and it just kind of flows. I mean, football in a lot of ways is the same way. I totally agree about what Patrick said because, well, it's important that they're going out there and throwing and, you know, kind of figuring out physically how they all interact. But he keeps emphasizing that they would hang out, they go to lunch, they go to dinner. You kind of figure out how each other thinks, and that translates to the field. Another interesting thing that he mentioned was that the coaches are going to teach the receivers routes one way, and they need to run it the way the coaches want. But Patrick was teaching it how he sees it. And now they can learn it from the coaches here in OTAs, and they can go into a game knowing it both ways. Here's how the route is designed. Here's how the concept is supposed to work. But here's also how Patrick is seeing it. Here's how his brain is processing it. I just found that really interesting, and that's kind of an advantage, I think. And Coach Reed mentioned that even today, the second day of OTAs, that while it was just the base stuff that they went over in Texas, like that was still a huge help. And it's evident that they're not just brand new. When you add a guy like Juju or Marquez Valdez-Scantling, like they're not brand new to it. They've been hanging out with Patrick a bit. They kind of know what he's thinking when he's out there already, and that's just a huge advantage, I think. So props to Patrick for doing the stuff in Texas. I think a lot of teams wouldn't have done that, and a total voluntary thing is to get together in your own time and get better at football. I think it's pretty cool, and I think that will pay dividends here moving forward. Don't forget, too, that Patrick last year, think about what he was dealing with coming off that foot surgery. He wasn't at 100%. Like, he couldn't have done that last year, and he mentioned in his press conference just how much better he feels this time around, that he's fully healthy. He can go out there and just play football with his guys, and that's going to help him this year. Defensively, I think it's also the case because Justin Reed mentioned in his presser about how important that off-the-field chemistry is and how that really impacts things. I mean, I'm sure you can speak to this because Justin said that his first 2 years in Houston, it was really good. Like, they would hang out like once a week or twice a week as a defense outside the building. So when it came to game day, they knew what each other was thinking. They know, you know, let's say you mess up and I come at you and kind of explain to you, hey, you messed up. You're not going to take it personally because you know I'm coming from a good place. Yeah. That's important. He said the last 2 years in Houston, it really just wasn't the case as much for their defense. And let's say, same scenario, if I come at you and say, hey, you screwed this up, you're going to take it personally and hate me, you know? He didn't say that, but he kind of alluded to it. So they're already doing that as a defense here. And Justin, we talked about it in our last DTK, is embraced such a leadership role on this team already. So to have kind of guys on both sides really emphasizing the importance of that off-the-field stuff, I think will pay dividends.
Patrick talked about going to basketball games, taking them to NBA games. Sporting, baseball games. I said, I'm going to take these guys around Kansas City so they'll see why I love it so much. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just think about that. So it's the off-the-field chemistry building. Shop, and you had a career as a defensive player, but to me, the epitome of this is the offensive line. This is a close group. Like, you look at Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith. You mentioned him earlier in the podcast, but these guys are in their second year. They're like 10-year veterans, but how they get along with each other, how they know each other's families. Tooney talked about staying in contact with Orlando Brown Jr., but the best offensive lines that I've seen in my brief 29 years in this league are those that get that. They're off the field. They have this own little subculture fraternity.
So if you think about offensive line, that's the only position that gets ranked or graded as an entire group. If the offensive line gives up 3-4 sacks a game, it could be one guy giving up all those sacks. That offensive line is going to be rated as porous. So defensively, they're going to come at him. They're going to try all these different stunts. They're not going to worry about which position gave it up. You get ranked, you get graded, you get evaluated as an entire group. So that group has to be so closely knitted. They got to be able to, every down, over and over again, I don't care if you're exhausted. I don't care if you're tired. I don't care if you sprained an ankle and you got on one ankle. We still have to perform through individual issues and problems at a very high level because we are in charge of protecting the most highest valued asset on the field, which is the quarterback. So when you're entrusted that, then there is no excuses. There is no take a play off or tapping out because you're a little bit tired or you're exhausted. You got to go out there and perform at a high level throughout the entire game. And so beyond just the offensive line, we look at some different positions. But when you say, from a quarterback position, everybody got to be on the same page. Imagine this scenario. Imagine the scenario where the coach puts in a route, where you're running a 9 route down the sideline. But in the coach's diagram in the discussion, they tell you, Matt, if the cornerback bails before the snap, then you're supposed to run a stop route. But in the offseason, I've talked to Pat, and Pat says, listen, on this certain route, I begin to look to the right side. That's my first, second, and read, and I'm coming back to you late. So if your corner bails at the snap, I won't even see it. So I need you to stick with the route unless you know I'm looking your route, right? And if I'm going to change my progression and come to your side first, I might give you a little hand signal to let you know, hey, I'm coming your way. So now you know I see the bail. And so that's 100% how a minor detail on how a route is run and adjusted to can create a interception if they're not on that same page. And that's something they can't. You don't have enough time to go over all those little details. But Pat is making time in the offseason to talk about these fines, like how I'm looking at things and how I see it. And you got to be you got to be a veteran yourself to know why that's important.
Yeah, well, a perfect example of that was in the Super Bowl. Sammy Watkins, 38-yard reception down the sideline that set up.
Richard Sherman.
Exactly, on Richard Sherman. We talked to Patrick in the summer after the Super Bowl that year, and he explained that was not the correct route. The whole thing there was because Sammy recognized it, Patrick knew Sammy recognized it, and they just kind of did backyard football. That wasn't the design play. But because of exactly what you're saying, it led to one of the biggest moments in the Super Bowl and led to a Chiefs victory in the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Awesome points. But hopefully now throughout the Chiefs Kingdom, and you can spread the word, yes, OTAs, organized team activities, are very important in the Chiefs Kingdom. And it's CCC with the conditioning, not just physical conditioning, but how we win, how we practice, how we work, consumption, and chemistry. And we'll close this way. Go look at a tree. If it's about 70 years old, or if you live in the United States, go visit a state park. It probably was put there by the Civilian Conservation Corps.
10, 5, touchdown! Lock it down! And the celebration begins at Arrowhead.